All right, thanks everyone for coming today. Today we're going to talk about training in VR. This is a pretty important subject. This year, it's been talked a lot about. This is the year of enterprise VR. Training in VR is a huge opportunity. I'm going to be sharing the stage with some really talented individuals, and I'm really excited to have them up here. I'm going to bring them up one at a time, and I'll introduce them. So can I first introduce Chris Chambers? He's CEO of Serious Simulations.
Hello.
Alex Colgan, digital content and community lead for Leapmotion. Kevin Oak, co-founder and VP of sales at LlamaZOO. And Michael Hildebrand, emerging technology strategist at Boeing. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm just going to go down the line a little bit and let everyone kind of introduce themselves and talk very briefly about what their role is at their company and a little bit of what they're doing in the technology. So Chris, can you start?
Sure. My name is Chris Chambers. I founded a company called Serious Simulations. Our intent was to create a very immersive environment for individuals and small groups, initially tactical groups like infantry squads or SWAT teams, to do a very immersive virtual reality training exercise. So we went down that path for quite a while and created a full-blown infantry trainer. And we found that in order to do that well, we needed to invent some wireless techniques. So we spent a lot of time doing some wireless VR innovation and have now some interesting HMDs, or head-mounted displays, that are completely wireless with our own technology there. Since then, we've started spreading out in our market targets into location-based entertainment and professional sports, as well as the tactical side. Any type of skill that has human motion as a critical aspect, and then the benefits of virtual reality is a great target market for our technology.
Awesome. Alex?
Hey, I'm Alex Colgan. I head up community and developer programs at Leapmotion. We create a hand tracking solution that doesn't require any kind of external sensors or gloves or tracking equipment of any kind. Our technology is actually designed to be embedded directly within VR headsets. We launched the original version of our peripheral back in 2013 and kind of started focusing really heavy on VR during the dawn of the third renaissance in 2014. So now we have these new mobile chipsets that are designed to be embedded directly in headsets, and we're working with a number of different OEMs to get that into their headsets.
Nice. Kevin?
Yeah, I'm Kevin Oak, VP of Sales and co-founder at LlamaZOO Interactive. We're a Victoria-based company. We've developed a 3D interactive learning and training platform. First subject matter vertical is veterinary anatomy, so taking CTs and MRIs. We built a completely medically accurate dog that you can virtually dissect, and there's a whole bunch of tools that the platform has for interacting with that dog. And now we've been working in other subject matter verticals as well, in industry and higher ed, heavy industry, architecture, and resources.
Nice. And lastly, Michael?
Hello. I'm Michael Hildebrand. I work with Boeing in Seattle, Washington, and been with them for about 2 years as an emerging technology strategist and developer. I basically function as a technology consultant and industry expert on emerging technology for Boeing. I work within the digital aviation organization that sells digital products to customers in the aviation industry. A lot of my colleagues develop apps for phones and tablets for pilots, mechanics, flight attendants, everyone in that industry. Myself, I focus on the emerging technology projects, and last couple of years I've focused on immersive reality. I've spent some time with Tango, with the Vive, with mixed reality and the HoloLens more recently. So I've been focused on maintenance training in the last 6 or 7 months with the HoloLens, and we've been able to create some cool stuff with that.
Awesome. So one question I really have is, with a lot of organizations right now, you really need to sell up the idea, like first even investing in and investigating, let alone the value in behind it. So, maybe to start with you, Michael, at the end, what are some ways that you have had to sell up to execs or to our management the value here, or even in being able to investigate? And then some of you guys can maybe want to touch on as well, if you're going in as like LlamaZOO does and trying to sell this to companies already.
Right. So in last 2 years, in my experience at Boeing, I've started at a lower level with business units, folks on the ground floor that see a need and would come to me and say, hey, what can we do to improve the situation? And once we find an idea and we flesh it out with a prototype, at that point, then we would need to sell upwards, as you're talking about, to leadership. And the two things I think of are see and show. So they need to see with their own eyes, put on a headset, whatever they need to do to see that this is real and we've already built it, and we could make this a full product if we wanted to. And we need to show the business, show them the money actually, show them this is what we saved last week implementing this prototype on the floor, and it equates to this many dollars, and dollars is what speaks to leaders. So if you don't have that, then it's going to be a rough time.
What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, like with any enterprise sale, you've got to find that sponsor that will champion you and work you through the org chart, and it's especially important to find that sponsor when you're evangelizing innovative, disruptive technology, because that brings ingrained, biases and politics, right? It's not always to everyone's benefit to bring in this new technology. There can be fear that comes along with that, and it can be difficult when you're bringing in something that's new and innovative and trying to find funds to fund like a prototype like that. So you've got to get creative, and you've got to find that benefit. What is that ROI? It can't just be a toy. And yeah, like building that prototype and having them actually see it, and then they can use their imagination and see. I can see how this could be used in the business. They need to immerse themselves in it and really believe in it. Get that vision for what could be done with the technology.
Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, in large organizations especially, there's often two major groups of stakeholders that you have to try to reach and to talk to. There are the executives, the ones that make the decisions, and then there are the product managers and the engineers, the ones that are actually responsible for making it happen. So they're two very different audiences, but yeah, to reiterate what these guys were saying, seeing and showing, there's really no substitute for actually getting people inside the headset, inside the hardware, and really understanding it. Because if not, you can try to make a case for it, but it's ultimately just going to be abstract to them.
And Chris, I mean, with the stuff that you work with, you're primarily like training in VR simulation, right? So what can you add?
Well, with training, virtual reality training, we're typically competing with live training options that the customer has, whether it's a military customer or police or what have you. So there's definitely an ROI that goes through their mind, but you can't just base it on cost. Cost is one of those obvious things that you can prove with VR versus expensive live training exercise, but you also have to show the benefit side. And that's a harder part to capture. The best way to do is, like you all said, is get them in the experience, and then they can visualize and experience the benefit of the VR aspect of the training. Geo-specific terrains, unlimited terrains, moving from vehicles to on foot, et cetera. All these things you can do virtually that are pretty impressive, but you got to get in there and assess that benefit as well as the cost.
Right. And the higher end you go, the more expensive it really gets, right?
Right, yeah. So.
Now, one real question I have is, how do you measure the effectiveness? So when we go back to like selling up, what you really want to do at the end is you want to have a user case for like showing like, look, we're saving money, or we're getting better at these things. Do you guys want to speak a little bit to like how you prove that effectiveness? What are the ways of measuring that or communicating that?
Sure. In our case, we just capture as much data as we can for replay, so that you can do an effective, what the military calls an after-action review, and walk them through critical parts of this training scenario. Fast forward it if you need to, skip the boring parts and get to the part that the instructor wants to make a point about. And being able to show individuals that they made a mistake, because sometimes they say, well, no, I didn't make a mistake. I didn't flag my buddy and put my rifle over my buddy or something like that. No, yes, you did. It's right here. So,
I can prove it now.
Yeah. So.
Pixar, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
I mean, there are studies that show that spatial learning and embodied learning are really compelling ways to be able to drive information home in ways that learning from, say, a book or an iPad or a flat computer screen just doesn't do. Kevin can probably speak more to this, but being able to see something in 3 dimensions, understanding it as an like anatomical object, being able to see the spatial relationships between different things is really critical, because it wires into how our human brains already work in the real world. And then if you're able to combine that with impossible interactions that allow you to, say, reach out and be able to explore the internal anatomy of a dog or a human and see how those structures relate to one another, it gives you a higher level understanding than anything that you are sort of forced to abstract from something that you see on a flat screen.
Yeah, absolutely. First is in any situation is getting a really good understanding of your customer's business, your client's business, and the KPIs that drives the business, and designing the experience around that, and making sure what you're building, you can measure those KPIs. In the case of higher education, they're very interested in student engagement, which has been linked in studies to retention of material. They're interested in assessment, how they do on the test scores. In the case of dissection, can they lower the number of dog cadavers they need? Can they increase the efficiency in dissection labs? But yeah, it comes down to really understanding your customers' businesses, and getting those case studies out, which I think it's kind of all of our responsibility as in this early days is to grow this and show that it's not a toy. This is really transformative technology.
Yeah. Michael?
As far as maintenance training and what I've looked at there, you could do the real-time tracking in the classroom scenario that I've looked at, bringing, for example, a HoloLens into our classrooms, the lecture-style classrooms, to get the students out of their seats. You can use, built into the game engines, you've got metrics in Unity that will track certain things. You've got, I know we have some groups at Boeing looking at learning record store with the X API to track some things as well. So we haven't, my group hasn't committed to either one of those yet. But you can do that on the fly, and then you can also do that afterwards. Once we send the students back to the airline and they're on the job, they're being watched for a couple of years to see if the training was effective. And there are certain ways that that's done. And so you could hit it either way. In the classroom, you can monitor real time, or you could do it afterwards. But we are not at the stage where it's in use today, at least for maintenance training. So couldn't tell you which one we're doing right now.
So one question I have, and this is very different from games, which can be stylized and stuff, and it may be different per business. How important is presence, immersion, realism for the training that you guys are looking at or advocating for? And I'll work my way back from Michael.
Okay. So I don't have a strong opinion on this, but right now I would say my camp is go all the way or don't go there at all for realism. If you're not able to get it really realistic, then just make it abstract. Yeah. And it does depend on the use case. So I would say for mixed reality, if you're using a HoloLens or a Tango, I would probably go more abstract. And then when you get something with a lot more power, like desktop VR, that's where I think you really have the opportunity to go into the full realism mode. And if you look at someone like Serious Simulations, I think that's a great example of they know that they can reach that height, and they went for it, and they're able to succeed based off of that capability. And you'll see some other folks that would like to get there and haven't gotten there, and so they're somewhere caught in the middle, and it's not been as successful.
Yeah, yes, certainly. I mean, I think we're fighting the idea that some people hold that AR VR equals video games, and so finding that realism, but being strategic about it, depending on the platform and the capabilities. You've got to find that sweet spot, because if you can't go all the way, as you say, it's not going to work. And yeah, I mean, we've found we've been fighting like those perceptions a lot, and coming from the place of being like video game developers, having that video game background, really having to show that this is not a gimmick, and it comes back to like benefits and ROI, and attaching it to that. So yeah.
Yeah. Speaking to this point, realism is very important, but I think it's also crucial that we think about VR as being kind of an alternate reality rather than something that needs to reflect our reality. So you can have visual realism, but you may want to think really carefully around sound design, for instance, where there should be some level of dynamic feedback in the sound and to some extent in the visuals as well, because that's going to be the only way that you're going to be able to trick people's brains. A lot of that involves thinking creatively and just working through what's going to reinforce that sense of presence, what's going to reinforce that sense of physicality and replace the sense of touch or replace some of the other senses that we're accustomed to having in the real world.
Yeah, we think realism is very, very important. And although I appreciate the compliment that we got pretty far along the way, but we don't feel like we're far enough. Of course, we're dependent on other people's graphics and we're not a software company, so we have, we're dependent on the entire immersive experience and try to improve where we can. So we do things like bringing in anything that an individual touches, we try to bring that real thing into the environment. Even though they have a VR display, we allow them to see their hands and feet, and also you can bring in a real weapon. It can be shot. It has recoil, safe recoil, luckily, something that we've developed. And it has data that's being streamed to the instructor, et cetera, but it's their real weapon, so they have their own way of manipulating the devices on the weapon and all, so that helps them to stay focused and make that leap from this is just a video game and I got a fake weapon, it's a toy, whatever. And so what you're looking for in the training aspect is that they have concentration, they believe that they're in a training environment, that there's a purpose for being there. And I think you have to keep them engaged as well. One way we engage them is through tactile feedback, like I mentioned, but we also have tasers. So if you're in a case of a SWAT or infantry trainer, if they're shot by an artificial intelligence character or another live character, they get a taser-like feedback. And that,
hard lesson to learn.
Yeah, and it helps reduce complacency and the feeling that they're in a game and they start taking things seriously.
I'll learn a lot faster if I'm getting tasered.
Yeah,
So, I'll tell you.
So we strive every day to bring more and more realism in, but we're not quite there, but we're getting pretty far along.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Well, that's great. And I think this leads really well into the next area that I want to bring up is like user input. So like there's different ways of doing user input. Obviously, Alex, we've got Locomotion. I can't wait to hear your stuff. But for you, Chris, user input is like you're actually bringing in the props, right? And again, that contributes to that. So how you guys are treating like all user input inside the experience? Yeah,
we make trade-offs based on the skill. So for a professional quarterback trainer, he needs to have the ball. So the ball needs to be real and it has to be correct. For the weapon, for military, the weapon is important. If there's a driver, of course, he needs to feel the various, the steering and the shifts and that sort of thing. But the rest of it is in the virtual world. So wherever it's important to feel something, we try to put a real object there and make sure that they have both. We don't try to replicate all that virtually. It's too hard right now, except for the leap motion, to replicate hands perfectly on a weapon that's in the virtual world. We'd rather just, at this point, use real hands on the object and let them see that, but then they can also see the virtual world, so they're kind of mentally moving between the two.
And then Alex, for you guys have a lot of dexterity. You guys have a lot of,
Full-
subtlety to the movement.
Full 26 points of data per hand, finger fidelity. Yeah. So obviously I'm a little bit biased, but there's really no substitute for having your fully articulated hands in VR. You can sort of reach out and you can grab something and you see just every finger represented. You don't have to have your hands occupied all the time. On a philosophical level, we're not opposed to the concept of handheld controllers. There are obviously some use cases where they're better suited. But just in terms of the sheer level of presence and immersion that you get from having your hands within that space, and also just the level of convenience that it brings. One of the biggest challenges that virtual reality has right now is being able to work its way into people's lives and workflows and into institutional settings. So you want to bring a VR headset into a teaching hospital. or if you want to bring it into different types of corporate environments, or if you want engineers to be able to sort of tool around with different design concepts, having to have controllers sort of in with that is just another level of inconvenience. It makes it less portable. It makes it so that it's not as easy to just be able to chuck it into a drawer. So that obviously makes a huge amount of difference just in people being able to start playing around with things right away and be able to onboard to an experience more rapidly than if they have to learn their buttons.
True. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on the use case and the desired results and user behavior in terms of the level of fidelity of controls you need. Do you want to encourage muscle memory or spatial memorization? And in this case, I'm considering inputs to be, room space, that being able to walk around being an input versus stationary VR.
Yeah, good point.
And then really going from there. And I think as we go along, we're still early days. We're going to see more specialized controllers for industry training that'll have a lot more fidelity and less abstraction than the out-of-the-box controllers. But again, it comes down to what you want to achieve.
Michael?
Yeah, so you've got a couple of categories of learning opportunities in immersive reality. Focus on the education side right now, as opposed to like a game. So for learning, you could sort of be, on rails, sort of a passive experience where you're not running around grabbing things. And that's where I think you open up the opportunity for something like a HoloLens where you don't really have your hands fully tracked like you have with Leapmotion, and you don't have controllers like you have with the Rift or the Vive. You've got some abstract gestures you can use with the recognition in the built-in cameras, but you also have voice. And voice has been the input mode of choice for my team for what we've built in the HoloLens, this holographic landing gear, interacting with it. It's so easy to teach. There is, a language barrier, and I think it won't be too difficult to implement different languages, language support packs for the HoloLens. But it's just, for some folks, it's really hard to get those, the air tap and the bloom and everything. And so you can skip all that and just say, all you gotta say is gear up, and landing gear goes up. So voice, I think, will be huge for immersive reality input.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. I mean, multimodal input more generally, I think it is going to come down to sort of a spectrum of inputs, especially as more of these technologies get put into place. There's eye tracking, hand tracking, voice, positional tracking. Qualcomm and some other companies have been doing some really interesting stuff with inside-out positional, so you don't even need the external sensors anymore.
Yeah.
It's going to come down to a combination of those things.
And giving them a choice, right,
Yeah.
is what everyone's asking for.
Absolutely.
Just talking about locomotion, right? You got people saying, why would you ever, have a pad to move you forwards in the world? Because it makes you sick, right? And other people are like, no, it doesn't make me sick. Please give me a pad so I can move around quicker in the world.
I got to teleport, or I want to actually walk around. Yeah, absolutely.
What's great is when we're talking about training or enterprise, there's a lot less price sensitivity around that, right? And so you can invest in these tools that'll help them out, which is great. Moving on to the next topic, I'm really curious on isolated versus social training. So the idea of how beneficial, and maybe it's different per group, or again, it goes down the product, on having multiple people in the same space training together versus an individual training by themselves in an isolated space. And I'll work my way back with you, Michael.
Okay. So with a holographic learning experience, again, what I've been working on in the last 6 or 7 months, we see in the future the opportunity for individual training, just-in-time training. You could be anywhere in the world and brush up on different part of the airplane. But with the classroom scenario that we've been looking at more recently, I think social will be a necessary aspect because right now so much of that training is, it's a class environment. You're with your peers from the airline, learning about the airplane and the systems, and you're talking with the instructor every day you're in class. And that part I don't think would be removed if we went into an immersive medium in the classroom. So in that case, it's critical.
Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it just depends on the use case. Individual learning, I mean, that's sort of more stoking the curiosity, sort of self-discovery. That's very beneficial and valid. But you're getting into social learning and the impact of peer-to-peer teaching. And then you start talking about virtual presence and having a professor, an expert in one part of the world who's able to talk to people in another part of the world, and then recording that lecture, that virtual space to revisit again. I mean, that's tremendously exciting. I think that's a real holy grail. Once we get the latency down, that's going to be really exciting. But again, yeah, I think it just comes down to what you want to do, what do you want to get out of it for the user.
Yeah.
Alex?
And with virtual and augmented reality, we have this unprecedented technology that allows us to engineer social scenarios in ways that has never been done previously. So in our digital lives, we're already fairly accustomed to having a number of gradations of presence. It's not like where I'm physically present here and I'm absent in another place. I can be somewhat present thanks to my phone. So I think a lot of the future is going to be introducing more of those gradations within VR so that people can be sort of dynamically paired up with partners, or they might be paired up with a partner in an AI, or they might have a sense of who else is engaged in training in other ways without them actively being within the experience with them, like being able to hear sounds off in the distance or seeing campfires up on a distant mountain. There are a lot of ways that we can design these experiences, particularly with the advent of AI, so that we're able to suit all learners, and so that the experience is actually able to adjust itself depending on people's strengths and weaknesses in relative areas.
Chris?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is I agree with all that, but most training is typically group training in industry or sports or military. So there's different ways we could do that, either with artificial intelligence or other live individuals that are maybe on laptops but feeding into the same simulator where others are being fully human motion tracked. But there's, I think, always an element of social or group training in most training environments. Yeah.
Great. So we're down to the last minute and a half or so. So I'm gonna do a bit of a lightning round on this one. I'm curious for you guys, for virtual training, what is the areas right now that are most being underserved by companies? Where are the opportunities right now for companies to step up and start finding opportunities to start building products and training for people? And I'll start with Michael. You had the hand raised.
I was thinking about that this morning, and I don't know as far as the business case if that's there, but for in schools,
Yep.
for learning, you see in the news, this school is trying out, the Vive to learn about, how the heart works. It's sort of a freak show. It's a publicity grab. I would love for them being immersive reality experiences to be as normal in school use, middle school, elementary school, high school, college, as laptops. And it's not a freak show whenever it happens in a school. It's not isolated. Everyone's using it because it's such a great way to learn.
Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we actually know yet. And I think that's what's so exciting about this space. It's early days, and this is the next great computing paradigm, and it's opening up all sorts of possibilities. I mean, I've talked with a lot of companies, startups and the like, that are serving underserved niches in AR, VR, where it's just, you'd never think there'd be a business there, but the technology is opening up cost savings and opportunities that weren't there before. So I mean, it's going to be so pervasive. It's very exciting.
Nice. Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the training in VR is exploding right now, and if you think there's a use case that's being underserved, there's almost certainly a company that's tackling it right now. I think it would be really interesting to see more applications by way of teaching programming and complex programming concepts. It's something that's, text input is really difficult to do, and being able to understand code at a spatial level would be extremely useful in terms of being able to bring new engineers and new thinkers into the space.
Great. And final word, Chris?
Yeah, I just think every area is underserved right now. There's so few areas that are fully served. So the world is our oyster.
Fantastic. So thank you all for coming. I want to give a huge round of applause for these guys. These guys are fantastic. They're experts in their field. Look for them on the floor. Ask them questions. Tap their brain. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks. you.